Welcome back to Train Signal. You are watching the video for Lab 4, Monitoring Active Directory Replication. Up to this point, we have set up the Active Directory and we have set up the connection objects and the sites to ensure that replication takes place. Well, in this video, let's monitor and make sure that the replication is actually taking place. In this video, you will learn how to install the Active Directory support tools from the server CD-ROM. Then we will use a variety of tools to monitor the Active Directory. To begin with, we will use a tool known as a Replication Monitor to actually monitor the Active Directory and troubleshoot the replication process. We will then use some command line tools in order to generate reports. And then finally, I'll show you how to create a batch file so that in order to replicate the entire domain, you do not have to go to Active Directory sites and services and then replicate by right-clicking on several connection objects like I've shown you up to this point. What we will do instead is we will automate the process by creating a batch file. Every time you run the batch file, the entire domain will be replicated. And then finally, you will play the role of a consultant. You will use a tool called the Active Directory Sizer that will help you plan your network as to how many servers you need, how many domain controllers you need, what the size of the Active Directory would be, depending on how many users and workstations you have in your network. So as the network grows, you can add additional devices to the network to ensure that the Active Directory replicates in an efficient manner. So let's get started with first installing the Active Directory support tools. So I'm going to minimize the screen over here and let's make a connection to our first domain controller, which is DC1. What I've done is inserted the CD-ROM in this computer. So I'm going to open up the CD drive, and then in the CD-ROM for server, there is a tool called there's a folder called a support folder. In there is a folder called tools, and over here are the support tools for Active Directory. They are all located in this cap file. So if I double click on this cap file, you will see that there is a variety of tools over here. In order to install this, Microsoft has given you a program. Sorry about that. I'll go back to that folder. Microsoft has given you a program, setup.exe. So I'm simply going to double click on this program to install the Active Directory support tool. So I'm going to click on the next button and then accept the settings over here. Typical installation is fine. And then start the process of installing the tools. There are a variety of tools. Some of them are graphical in nature. The others have to be run from the command prompt. Now, what is happening is that these tools are being installed over here. This process finished too quickly, but they're being installed into a folder called a support tools folder in programs. I'm going to navigate and show you where these tools are. It is important to know where the tools are installed, especially for the command line tools, because you have to be in that particular location in order to run these tools. So to begin with, let's go and see where the tools got installed. In programs under admin tools, actually under programs itself, it has created a folder called Windows 2000 support tools, and in there is a subfolder over here called tools, and the tools that we are interested in are installed over here. The tools, these are the graphical tools that you're looking at. In fact, one of the tools that we will be using is the Active Directory Replication Monitor. In a previous video, I've shown you how to use the ADSI editor. But what I was also going to show you is that if you would like to run the command prompt tools that were installed, you need to click on the command prompt from here. In other words, don't go to start, run, and type CMD like we normally do. Go to the support tools link over here in the programs and then click on the command prompt. The reason for that is that over here, these tools are installed in the program into a folder called program files, and in there is a folder called support tools, and all the tools must be run from here. This particular location is not in the path statement, so you have to ensure that you are in this particular line in order to be able to run these tools. Otherwise, you'll get a message saying that the command was not recognized. Basically, what DOS is informing you is that, well, it did not recognize the command simply because it did not find it, simply because you were in the wrong location in the command prompt. So once again, do not start the command prompt like we normally do by clicking on start, run, and then typing CMD. What this does is it takes you to a different location, and this is not where the command tools are. Okay, so please make a note of that and make sure that you are over here before you run these tools. So let's get started with the very first tool that we will run. I'm going to go back to my notes. Let's minimize this. And the very first tool that we will use is what is known as the Active Directory Replication Monitor, a very popular tool. It is also graphical in nature. It's basically a Microsoft Management Console that lets you see graphically who the different replication partners are, and it generates very useful reports that you can actually save for documentation or even print it out. So in general, this tool is used to view the status of the Active Directory replication process. You can also force replication between domain controllers. You can monitor replication and generate reports. And you can also view the network in a graphical format. More precisely, here's how you would use Replication Monitor. Remember all these different domain controllers. Let's go back to our diagram over here. There are just 3 domain controllers over here, but as the network benandbrady.com expands, you would expect to find additional domain controllers. And now you've done a good job setting up sites and connection links to these domain controllers and ensuring that replication takes place at a set schedule. However, it is also a good idea to keep monitoring to make sure that whatever you have set up is actually happening in the domain. So as you add additional domain controllers, it becomes extremely important to monitor from time to time to monitor the fact that the Active Directory is replicating across all the domain controllers in a domain. And if it is not, you need to find out where the problem is and actually fix it. So the Replication Monitor tool helps us in that tremendously. You'll be able to see exactly when a replication partner fails. You will be able to keep a history of successful and failed replications. And then you can also view the directory of the replication partners itself. You'll get a lot of information about the domain controllers that actually participate in the replication process. You can also force a replication right from there. You can also trigger the knowledge consistency checker. So in case you've added additional domain controllers and you would like the KCC to actually look at all the domain controllers one more time and recalculate a replication topology to make it more efficient, you can trigger that from the replication monitor itself. And replication monitor is a central tool. Using just one replication monitor, you can add all the domain controllers in that domain, in fact from multiple forests as well, and then monitor the replication of those domain controllers all from one location. So let's see all this in action. What I'm going to do is minimize this, and let's go back to our DC1, and in there we will run the tool known as Replication Monitor. So you need to go to Programs and then go to Windows 2000 Support Tools. In there is a Tools folder, and over there you have the AD Replication Monitor. When you run this tool for the very first time, it is a blank screen, a blank MMC. It lets you customize exactly what you want to monitor. So let's first start adding the servers that you would like to monitor. In our case, we will add our 3 domain controllers. So select this link, right click, add monitored server, and then over here you can either search for it or you can pick it up yourself. What I'm going to do is I'm going to search for it in the Active Directory, and here we go. Remember, you can search for it in this domain or in some other domain, or maybe in a different forest altogether. So this lets you navigate and find exactly the domain controller that you would like to get. Click on the next button over here, and it's going to show me the different sites. What I'm going to say is that, well, go ahead and add the DC1, and it added the domain controller for me. In this manner, let's go ahead and add the other domain controllers as well. We'll click on Add Monitored Server. At this time, I'm going to say just add it by name. So I'm going to click on the next button over here, and over here I'm going to type the name DC2 and click on Finish, and here we go. We got DC2. Let's add our 3rd domain controller so we can monitor them all. Add Monitored Server, and this time we will type the name DC3. Click on Finish, and here we go. It found our 3 domain controllers. And it also neatly organizes these domain controllers by site, because as you know, there are 2 types of replication, intra-site and inter-site, and it wants to make sure that you can see this graphically or visually and ensure that this is a domain controller in this site and these 2 are domain controllers in the California site. So look at how neatly it laid out all our domain controllers. Now let me explain to you exactly what you're viewing over here. Just to reposition the screen over here a little bit. Let's start with this object. So here's a site, California. This is a site, North Carolina. In California, there are 2 domain controllers, DC1 and DC2. Now, DC1 is also a global catalog server, and you can see that because of the symbol of the globe over here. And if I were to expand, click on any of these objects over here, these are the 3 partitions of the Active Directory. In other words, Active Directory is a humongous database. It has 3 different components that is visible over here. The first component is a schema component, or these are known as the partitions of the directory, mainly the sections of the directory. Schema is a definition of objects, of all the objects that appear in the forest actually. And the second one is the configuration, or the configuration of all your objects in the Active Directory. And the third one over here is a definite is the objects that actually exist in the Active Directory. So if I were to expand any of these, you will see that I can see that in the dependentbrady.com domain there are actually two different domain controllers, this one and this one over here, that DC1 is actually linked to. So DC1 over here is linked to DC3 as well as DC2. Now let's go on to DC2 and look at the same thing over here. So basically this is showing you the replication partners of DC1. DC1's replication partners are DC3 and DC2, and DC2's replication partner is simply DC1. Now as I'm clicking over here, what I'm going to do is reposition the screen over here a little bit so you can read what's happening on the right hand side of the screen over here. So when I click over here, for example, it's giving me the status of replication as to exactly when it took place and how long ago has it been. For example, over here I'm clicked on DC1. So the replication between DC2 and DC1, here we go. I'm going to reposition the screen a little bit. So it took place last on 1/29/2005 at 1:43 p.m. and over here it's telling us the highest USN or the update sequence number that is on that particular server. The replication was successful, and it tells you the exact time when this actually took place. Okay, so looking at the status, you can actually find out whether or not replication took place and when. Now if I were to click on this connection object over here, this is the replication between DC1 and DC3. So once again, as you can see, it took place also successfully, and it took place at this time, on this date, at this time. Okay, so our replication is taking place. Okay, now just so that I can show you what happens when replication takes place, this screen will actually keep filling up. So what I'm going to do is simulate that environment for you. I'm going to go to Active Directory Sites and Services on DC1. I could have gone to any other domain controller, but for convenience I'm going over here, and I'm going to deliberately push the replication over here. So what I'm going to do is, just like I showed you before, replicate now, and then over here as well, replicate now. Now this replication will take place in a few minutes, and we may or may not be able to see our status screens immediately, but let's give it a shot. Okay, and if we don't, then we'll just revisit it at some other time and then check it out that time. Now over here I'm going to click on this button over here that says update automatically, so that it's going to update the screen very soon for us. Now it's going to ask me for how many minutes to wait before the update. I'm going to deliberately put it as 1 minute so that it refreshes very fast for us, and it's trying to do the update at this point. Once it finishes the updates, you may see more items over here. You may not see it immediately, but eventually over a period of time you will see that it's giving you more status reports over here. Now I just changed it to 1 minute over here just as an example to show you over here in the lab. Keep it as the default value of 60. This is not something that you want to monitor 24/7 at all times. So this is something that you would monitor from time to time. Make sure you know how to use these objects and be able to monitor them. So a review one more time. Let's see if anything has happened new over here. I'm going to refresh my screen. There we go. I just refreshed my screen by clicking on the F5 button, and then it showed me in the second replication which just took place recently. This is the replication that I just pushed. See the time over here, 1:48:14, and if I were to go down and show you the time that I'm currently on, this is when I pushed the replication. So a few minutes ago it showed me the status, and the actual time when the replication took place was 1:47:01. So this way you get a good idea as to when the replication is taking place. You can see the status right over here, and you know that everything is going okay. Now you're not limited to viewing the status right over here itself. What you can also do is generate reports for you, and to do that what you need to do is click on DC1, right click, then over here select this item called generate status report. So once again on DC1, right click and say generate status report, and then over here it's asking me for the name of the log file. What I would like to do is save it to the root of the C drive, and I'm going to call this log file stat1. It's going to give it the extension .log, and then click on the save button. And here is what I need to actually report on. These are the different components of the report. If you would like to see only certain sections, you may want to choose you may want to uncheck one of these boxes not to be able to see that. For example, if you're not interested in the subnets report section, then you uncheck that, and you will not that particular section will not be a part of the report. So I'm going to leave everything on and then click on the OK button over here. It's generating a report for us. This is basically a text file that is generated on the root of the C drive. The report is complete. I can either open up that file by going to the drive itself. Here's the C drive, and here's the report that was generated for us, stat1.log. Or I can view this report directly from, I'm going to close this, directly from the Active Directory Replication Monitor itself. So I'm going to go over here, and this is a file, open log, and I'm going to open up the log to view this report. Now let's go through this report and get an idea as to exactly what is being monitored. So going down over here, this report is basically giving the information about the schema. It's letting you know that this is doing it for benandbrady.com, and these are the 3 partitions of the Active Directory that was on DC1. Okay, so this is the DC1 data section, and it is also saying that because it is a global catalog server, it has additional items that that is going to report on. And here are the connection objects. DC1 has a connection object with DC3 and DC2. Basically what this means is that these are the 2 replication partners of DC1. And these connection objects, as you can see over here, were auto-generated. In other words, knowledge consistency checker generated these objects, and they are part of the replication topology that is monitored by the KCC at all times. Okay, so this is what it's giving you information as to what has been replicated between these 2 domain controllers. And here's the status. Here's the partner name. It's giving you many more details over here. Here are the things that you should check and be happy when you see messages like this. Number of failures 0, failure reason error code 0, the operation completed successfully over here. So things are working okay. How is this replication taking place? It's taking place through the IP protocol, and the IP protocol that it uses, the component of IP it uses is called RPC, or remote procedure call. You may have seen this if you have been using Active Directory for a while. You may see a message that says that RPC server not available. There's really not much you can do. This is not a service that you can even start from the services link in the admin tools. The RPC server is a basic service that must be running on the domain controllers at all times for it to be functional with other domain controllers. If this service fails, what you should do is once again systematically shut down all the domain controllers and bring them up systematically one after another, and hopefully the RPC service will link with each other, and then you'll have a working domain. So again, this is the report with a replication partner DC3, and here's the report with replication partner DC2. Going down over here, change notifications. These are the notifications that were received by DC1 from DC3 and DC2. Remember, these domain controllers actually just send a notification, and it is up to DC1 to actually go and get that information from those domain controllers. Now it's giving you information about the individual partitions of the Active Directory. Going down the list over here, trying to find something else that's useful for us to actually look at. These are like sub notices of the main report. And going down the list again, let's see if there is something else that we can talk about. Here we go. The FSMO roles, which will be our topic of discussion in the next video. It's also giving you a report saying who the flexible single master operation roles are for this domain. And in this particular domain, DC1 happens to have most of these roles. But let's wait for this topic until the next video. You will learn in detail what the FSMO roles are and how they can be changed. What is important to note over here is that if you would like to find out who the FSMO roles are, it's part of the report that was generated for us. Okay, and here's the different size of the directory replication that took place. The LDAP is the protocol, the lightweight directory access protocol that is used to actually facilitate this process. Here's the information or the statistics on the database. It is stored in the NTDS folder and so forth. Here's the knowledge consistency checker section, and more information over here as to your 2 sites. So here's the site California. This site has 2 domain controllers. A wealth of information that has been generated over here. You can actually take this information and actually print it out. Here's information on the site links. You can save it for future reference, and then just delete the older files as you go along. Here's the information of the subnets that we created and so forth. It would also be a good idea if you're visiting a new company or you're acting as a consultant to a company to go over to their domain controller and, if possible, generate this report. And this is where you would grab a cup of coffee and go over everything and just make sure you understand exactly how the domain is set up. And again, the report will be large depending on how big your domain is. So going back to the diagram over here, here are our three domain controllers. This is the symbol of the global catalog. You can see the symbol over here also for the global catalog. There are some other symbols. When you see a symbol like this is actually a symbol of a telephone. It's not very clearly visible, but it's a symbol of a telephone. This basically means that this is a bridgehead server. If you recall, bridgehead server is a server on each site that participates in the Active Directory replication, and this is the bridgehead server for DC1. And if I were to go to DC3, I would find a similar object. Here we go. DC1 is a bridgehead server with DC3 and so forth. So hopefully this gives you a good idea as to what can be monitored and how do you generate reports from Active Directory. This is one of those features that is not installed by default, and so a lot of administrators do not use it. I find this report very useful. As I said, one of the first things I do when I visit a company, if I'm on a consulting project, is to try to generate this report and then go over this report just to get a good feel of what the network is, how many domain controllers are there, and how it is actually set up between the different locations of that company. So this was the replication monitor. What I'm going to do is cancel auto update over here, so that it does not update every minute like I'd set up before, and I'm going to set it back to 60 as the interval so that I do not generate a lot of traffic and activity on this particular domain controller. What I'm going to do is minimize the screen and then go back to our talking points over here. So that was the first tool. The second tool that I'm going to talk about is what is known as the replication administration tool, also known as RepAdmin. This is a command line tool, and it is used to view the replication topology from each domain controller's perspective. So setting on a domain controller, you can find out who your replication partners are, what the connection objects are, and so forth. You can also force it to replicate the entire domain by using this command prompt tool. In fact, what we will do is we'll start by looking at the syntax of this tool, do some activity in the command prompt, and then later on I'll create a batch file, and that batch file will basically replicate all the domain controllers in the domain simultaneously once you simply double click on it. So let's get started with this tool. So to get to this tool, or rather to use this tool, once again, I'm just going to show you the wrong way first. Do not go to start, run, and then type on command, and then over here type RepAdmin. It has some parameters, but just to show you over here, if I type it the way it is, it's going to say that it's not a recognized command simply because it is not in the path. Okay, if I were to type the word path over here, you will see that what's in the path is the system32 folder and the WinNT folder and the system32, the WBEM folder. So this particular tool is not installed over here. I'm going to close this. This particular tool is installed in the support folder that was created when we installed these tools. So what I'm going to do is go to the tools folder over here and open the command prompt from here. And over here is where this tool is. So let me show you the different examples of using this tool known as the RepAdmin. So to begin with, let's type the following command: RepAdmin. I got it right, yes. And then over here, the first command will be slash with a switch, show reps, and then I'm going to say DC1. Remember, this particular command will show or will run the command from a certain domain controller's perspective. I could have typed DC2, and this will show the answer to this particular command based on DC2's perspective. Okay, what I'm trying to make a point over here is that just because I'm sitting on DC1 does not mean that I have to type DC1 over here. Whatever domain controller you type over there, you're running this command from that domain controller's perspective. So over here, what I'm trying to say, ask this particular tool is, show me the different replication partners for DC1. I'm going to hit the enter button over here. It ran a report for me. I'm going to rearrange this report a little bit so that you can see it better. Let's see if I can get it just right for you. There we go. Let's go a little bit higher. Here we go. Now I need to go this way. Great. So here we go. Show replication partners DC1 is where I typed in, and then it basically found my partners for me. So here we go. The inbound neighbors for DC1 are DC3 and DC2 via RPC. We talked about it. And here are the different partitions of the Active Directory that have been replicated. And then it basically shows me the list of all the partners of this particular domain controller. Now, had I typed the same command, I'm going to use the up arrow over here to quickly change it from DC1 to DC2. Okay, so even though I'm setting on DC1 over here, I can type this from any domain controller's perspective. Now it is showing me the replication partners for the domain controller DC2, okay, and its replication partner is DC1, and over here you will not see any object for DC3 as expected. So to begin with, we started with the first usage of this command repadmin / show reps. This is the switch that shows the different replication partners for the name of the domain controller that follows next. Also, a word of caution over here. In Server 2003, some of these switches have changed. In fact, in Server 2003, this switch is called show REPL. So just in case you're using one or the other version of the server, just be a little bit careful. I have not tried out each of the commands separately on each of the servers. For example, in Server 2003, I always use show REPL. If I use show REPL over here, I know for a fact that it gives me an error message. Let's try that. DC2, and there we go. It's basically showing me the help screen telling me that I need help to run this command, okay, just because it did not recognize this command. So just be aware of that. Some of the switches have changed between the two versions of server. Alrighty, let's move on to the next one, and this time we will change our switch to show con meaning connection objects, and then I'm going to type from whose perspective it has to show us the connection objects for DC1, and again it's showing you all the different connection objects for DC1. So these are little commands that you can type to actually see the replication process from a particular domain controller's perspective. Again, very useful to generate reports from this, and I'll show you later on how to generate reports out of these by redirecting the output from the screen over here to a text file. Now what we're going to do is something more useful. Here's the next command that I'm going to type. Let's type repadmin. Okay, and now the new switch that I will use is called sync, SYNC all. So it's one word, sync all, and then over here I'm going to say DC2. Let's start with DC1, and then over here I'm going to define the distinguished name DC equals Ben and Brady, comma DC equals com. Okay, so in this particular command, what I'm doing is I'm forcing the replication. I'm saying sync all, or to replicate with all the replication partners of DC1. Replication partners of DC1 are DC2 and DC3, and this is to define where DC1 is located. In other words, which domain am I trying to replicate from? And I'm going to hit the enter button, and if our command is good, it should actually do the process for us, and I think it has. It says call terminated with no errors. Everything is synchronized at this point, and it is not clear how to read this report simply because it uses the GUID numbers and other SID numbers that of other domain controllers to show you that replication is taking place. But the important message is here: sync all finished. There were no errors. So at this point, you have successfully replicated DC1 with DC2 and DC3. Well, as an example, how are you going to replicate DC2 with all its replication partners? Use this command again. Change this from DC1 to DC2, and then here we go, the replication took place one more time. Now this command can be very useful to create a batch file that we can run again and again in order to replicate our domain. And this is one of my favorite batch files that I create and save right on the desktop of my administration's workstation to replicate the domain across the Active Directory. Now let me show you how you're going to do this. So here's what we need to do. Let's go going back to our diagram over here. These domain controllers should replicate with the replication partners. DC1 should replicate with DC2 and DC3. DC2 should replicate with DC3. I'm sorry, DC2 should replicate with DC1 because it's intra-site replication, and DC3 should replicate with DC1. All right, this is what we had set up in the previous videos. So now what I'm going to do is create a batch file, and in the batch file create these commands and make sure that when I run this batch file, these commands will always replicate the entire domain for me. Typically, how do you replicate the domain? You use Active Directory sites and services like we've been doing all this time in these videos, and now we may not have to use this tool anymore, at least for replication. And typically what we do is we go to each of these servers, and then you select the server that you want to replicate with, right click, replicate now. Now you have to do this several times, and you have to visit this and do it individually. Well, what if I were to create a command line batch file that will do this process for you automatically simply by double clicking on it? And remember, the more domain controllers you add, the more useful this particular batch file becomes. So let me show you how to create this batch file. To begin with, what we will do is the following. What I'm going to do is navigate and find this tool rep admin, and this is important simply because just to make the command line go faster and to make the batch file a little bit easier on us. So I'm going to go to the program files and ask Windows over here to show me all the tools. You just maximize these windows for you. And in the program files, it has created a folder called support tools, and in there is a file that I need. The file is repadmin.exe. So let me go down the list over here until I find what I need. I'm in the M's over here, NOPQR. There we go. That's the command. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this file. I'm going to say copy to folder, and I'm going to copy to the WinNT system32 folder simply because it is part of the path statement. So let's go to system WinNT system32 and copy it over there. So this particular command is now available to me from any command prompt. I do not have to go to a special location in order to run this. Okay, this is just to make our batch file a little bit more generic and make it easier to, for it to operate. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new text file. So what I'm going to do is go to accessories and then use notepad from there to create my batch file. Now in this particular batch file, it's good to start with the remark statement so that you know exactly what this particular batch file does. So I'm going to say this batch file will synchronize all DCs in the domain. Very good. And just going to leave some space over here. The remark statement basically means that this particular line will not be processed. You're leaving these remarks so that you can leave some notes for yourself so you know exactly what this particular batch file does. And here's the command that we will type. The same command as before, repadmin. Okay, be very careful when you type a command in the batch file, and always make sure that you test the batch file before you put it into production. So the switch is sync all, and then what we would like to do is in turn go from DC1, DC2, and DC3. So I want to synchronize with all the domain controller replication partners of DC1, and to end this command, the domain component is Ben and Brady, comma DC equals com. So this command looks good. Repadmin sync all the partners of DC1 which belongs to the benbrady.com domain. Now what I'm going to do is highlight this line, copy it, and then paste it over here, and then just change this from DC1 to DC2. Do it one more time, paste it over here, and change this from DC1 to DC3. So basically what I'm saying is DC1 replicate with all your replication partners, DC2 do the same thing, DC3 do the same thing. In effect, by running this batch file, I would have replicated with all the replication partners of the entire domain. Now I'm going to save this batch file. So I'm going to say file save as, and let's save it right on the desktop for easy access. I'm going to call this batch file domain replication .bat. Now a word of caution over here. If you just save it the way it is, what it will do is it will put an extension .txt. In other words, whatever I just created will still be a text file. In order for you to create a script or a batch file, you must end it with the extension .bat. So to force it to use the extension .bat, what you need to do is put quotation marks around this. Okay, so I've put the double quotes over here, and now I'm going to save it to my desktop. So I'm going to close this file, and now it looks like a command prompt, and it's on the desktop. So from now on, every time you want to replicate your domain, very simply, I'm going to move it over here. Simply go to your batch file, double click on it, and the domain replicated. Had there been an issue, you would see an error message, but this worked fine for us. Okay, once again, every time you want to replicate a domain, simply double click on it, and all the domain controllers are now replicated with each other. Isn't that great? So use this command to actually create batch files for you, so that your work as the network administrator becomes easier. And then use the replication monitor from time to time to make sure that the replication process is taking place like it's supposed to, so that you have no issues in your domain. Going on to the next tool, the directory services utility. This is a tool that is used to compare two directory trees across replicas within the same domain, or in a case of global catalog, okay, across different domains. So basically, if there are two domain controllers and you want to make sure that the version of Active Directory on both of them or the different domain databases are the same, this will basically give you statistics, whether or not it is the same as not. This, in other words, what this is going to do is look at DC1, look at DC2, and look at DC3, compare the three, and then basically tell you whether they look similar or not. And if not, then that gives you a clue as to maybe there is some replication that has not taken place. Replicate your domain, run this tool again until you find a good message. So let me show you how to use this. Let's minimize this and go back to domain controller 1. And once again, let's go to our command prompt. And I'm going to clear the screen over here a little bit. Okay, now this is the command you have to type very carefully. It's a long command. What we're going to do is type the command dsa stat. Be careful, it is not ds-stat, it is dsa-stat. And then the first switch is /s, which is a switch for the server. What I'm going to say is compare DC1, semicolon, DC2. So these are the two servers that we would like to compare. And then here's the switch B. And this switch we have to specify with quotations the fully qualified name, location of our of the storage of our domain controllers. Let me explain that to you in a little bit. Let me just finish this. Controllers, comma, DC equals, comma, equals com, end with this. So let me make sure I got this right. DSA stat, compare these two domain controllers, and these two domain controller objects are located where? In the domain controllers container. Because this is a container that was created by the system when you first installed Active Directory, it is not considered an OU. Hence, for the distinguished name, you use the words CN or common name, comma, DC equals Ben and Brady, which is not very visible over here, comma, DC equals com. And by doing this, and I'm going to hit the enter key over here, what you're looking for is a keyword that should show up at the bottom over here once this tool is done running, and that keyword is pass, and you can see it right over here. Alright, so it is closing the connection between the two. It basically compared the directory databases of the two, and the moment it says pass, that means that the server sizes are equal, there was no difference between the two servers, and they look identical in every respect. So this is what DSA stat does. It basically looks for two different versions of Active Directory on two different controllers and compares it to make sure that the versions are the same and you have exactly the same set of objects on both the domain controllers. Those of you familiar with the copying process or have been involved in the backup, this is the same thing as saying that after you've backed up, you're performing sub-tests to make sure that what you backed up is the same as the original data. All right, and a lot of good administrators do that from time to time. For example, if I were to ever back up something that's critical, I would go and find the properties of that backup. In the original one, I would see how many folders were there. Let's say there were 5 folders. I'll go back to the location where I backed it up and make sure there are 5 folders. And then I would run some other tests also. For example, this particular backup process should contain 3,000 files. I will go to the backup location and make sure that there are 3,000 files and so forth. Okay, so these are some checks that you need to perform just to make sure that everything is in sync in your domain. So that was the DSA stat tool. Going back to our notes, the next tool that we're going to study would be the DC domain controller diagnostic tool. This is a command line tool once again that is used to analyze the state of the domain controller in the forest and reports basically if there is any problem with that domain controller. Again, it gives you nice reports that you can actually format and import it into a text document. So let's do that. I'm going to go to DC1 and let's go to the command prompt one more time, clear the screen, and now this time we will use a tool called DC domain controller diagnostics, DC diag, and then over here I'm going to say /s for server :DC1. So what I'm saying is give me a diagnostics on the domain controller DC1, and I'm going to run this tool, and it's going to do perform a check on the different components or objects within the Active Directory on DC1, and then give me a report on each and every subcomponent of that. So here we go. Let me go up a little bit over here. So here's the process started. It passed the connectivity test. It's basically performing each of these tests and making sure that it passed. Replication test was passed. The logon is working okay. Advertising is taking place all right, so that when you go to network places, you'll be able to browse the different objects created on this particular domain controller. and so forth. It goes down the list over here, and let's see. And FSMO check was also performed good on that. Inter-site replication is looking good on this as well. Okay. Now, a report like this, a lot of you may be familiar with this process, but let me just show it to you. If you simply type the command in this manner, what happens is that the standard input is the keyboard. So I've typed the command using the keyboard, and the standard output is the screen. If you would like to change that from the screen to a file, what you do is you put a space over here, put in the greater than symbol, then over here give the location and the name of the file. So what I'm going to say is that in the C drive, create a file for me called dcdiag.txt. Okay, so what's going to do is now when I hit enter, it ran the report, but the report is not visible on the screen. Let me just reposition the screen and show you what actually happened. It ran this command, and the report did not come up on the screen like it did before. Instead, what it did was it created a text file for me. And this is a very useful way of generating outputs that you can print out or keep as documentation on important objects such as domain controllers. So here we go. It created a report called dcdiag, and now it's the same report. I can print it, I can copy from this, I can save this and archive this for future use and so forth. Use this command a lot also to get information that is normally available from the command prompt. Let me give you another example that I do all the time that I'm sure you've done from time to time as well. What I'm going to do is get out of all this and then clear my screen so that I have a clean screen over here. And this is one of the things that I do on a regular basis. ipconfig/all gives you all the values on a domain controller, especially if I'm trying to make any changes to the domain. A good way of making sure that in case things don't go as planned, or in case you would like to reconnect the domain the way it was simply because you have to abort for some reason, or if this particular upgrade, for example, is going to take several days, what you do is it's a good idea to keep information about what the TCP/IP settings were on important servers before you make any changes to it. All right. So if you run ipconfig/all, what does it do? It gives you a good report as to exactly what TCP/IP settings are set up on this particular server. Now do the same report, and this time what we're going to do is use the greater than symbol, and then what we're going to say is that in the C drive, let's call it tcpip.txt, and now it's going to keep a report for us in the C drive under the file name tcpip.txt. So again, a great way of documenting the network. You don't have to print it out, don't have to take little post-it notes and write down these numbers. Just keep the files handy, print it out, keep it with you for documentation. You'll be surprised how enlightened other administrators would be when you start using this process and how useful this can be. I have been able to recover a lot of information that was lost by other network users or other domain controllers simply because I had kept information notes in this manner. So let's close all this and see what other tool we need to study. Going on, the next tool is the Active Directory Sizer. So now you've become a seasoned network administrator. It is now time to play the role of a consultant, where you're actually going into a company and you're going to build up this huge Active Directory database for them. Active Directory Sizer is a capacity planning tool that will help you determine the organization size of the Active Directory deployment. In other words, it lets you determine how many domain controllers you need, how many of those should be global catalogs, how many sites would be a good idea to set up, how many would be bridgehead servers, the memory required, the bandwidth, and so forth. Okay, so it's a capacity planning tool. Let's say that you're playing the role of a consultant, or your network is growing. All right, you're the administrator of a network and your network is growing, and you have a feeling that you will need additional domain controllers. Well, let's convert that feeling into reality by running this tool, putting in some numbers, and the answer that will give us will be basically, it will tell us to run the Active Directory in an optimized manner, you need the following hardware, you need so much memory, and so forth. So let's run this tool. This tool, Active Directory Sizer, is a free download from Microsoft's website. So what I've done is I have gone to the website and downloaded this tool, and I've put it in the C drive over here in this folder called AD Sizer. Okay, there's a setup file, so I'm going to install this tool. It's a graphical tool, which basically is a small query. You basically provide answers to the wizard that is going to ask us, and then let me finish installing this tool. And then after you provide the answers, it will basically give you a result saying that, well, based on what you told me, you will need so much hardware, so much RAM, and so forth. So let's see how this tool works. I have installed it, And now in order to use this tool, let's go to, let me close some of these windows that are open. Oops. And close this as well. All right, so let's go to Active Programs, and here's the new link, Active Directory Sizer. And there's also a very good help file actually on the Active Directory Sizer that you may want to consult. But here we go, Active Directory Sizer. This tool came out with Windows 2000. It can also be used with Server 2003 as well. Okay, so here's the tool. Here's a domain configuration, site configuration. So what you're going to do is right click on this and then say add a domain. And that is what starts the wizard. So I'm going to call this domain new domain and then click on the next button. What we're going to do is build up a fictitious domain for a customer, for example, and see what values it provides us. What is the total number of users in this domain? Before I continue with this, what it's going to do is it's going to go through each of these sections. We were in the introduction section, we actually just passed it, just one click over there. The second section is the user accounts. Then later on it will want to know from us how many computers in a domain, and then administration, and then exchange of related questions, and finally would be services that you'll be running. So I'm going to go through a barrage of these questions just to give you an idea as to how extensive this tool is and how good a value you can get based on the questions that you answer over here. So the total number of users in this domain, let's say this is going to be a small domain and I'm going to have, let's say 100 users, okay? What percentage of these users would be concurrently active during peak hours? All our users would love to be on computers at all times. So let's leave it at 100%. How many additional attributes will you have per user? Well, let's leave it to the default value of 25, all right? So in other words, besides the users, we'll have more additional attributes within the user account for 25. Click on next. And again, I can always click on finish, saying that, well, that's the only information that I have. Give me the answer based on what I already told you. What is the average number of groups a user will belong to? Well, each user, let's say, will belong to approximately 4 groups. How frequently do users' password expires? Well, 60 days is fine. Every 2 months, you would like them to change their passwords. Now, what is the average logon rate per second during peak hours? You can either put in the value over here, interactive, meaning how many of them will actually hit control, delete, and log on, batch from the batch files or batch programs that you're running, and network throughout the services. Or we can say that based on the values that I've given you so far, please estimate it for me. And it does some estimation over here. I'm going to close this and accept the value that it gave us. All right, so let's keep the value the way it is. Click on next, and now it wants to know how many computers. Let's say 100 users, and they all are going to have a computer for themselves. Okay, 100. How many other computers would you have? These would be servers and other types of computers. There we go. How many other objects will be published in the Active Directory, such as printers, shares, and so forth? Let's say that we're going to publish about 20 different objects. Click on next. And now, what is the desired average CPU utilization? We'll leave it at 50% for the domain controllers. In other words, it needs to know how many domain controllers you need, but one of the variables that it wants to know from you is that, well, how much do you want to push your domain controllers? 50% is good enough. What is the preferred CPU type for domain controllers? Let's keep it at auto select. Number of processes again, auto select. All right, the administration portion. Please enter the average number of objects you plan to add, delete, or modify, all right, on a regular basis. So let's pick up a weekly interval. And weekly, let's say that I'll be adding, let's say 2 users, deleting. You know what, let's make it monthly. For the number of users that we have, it doesn't give me monthly. All right, so let's do weekly again. 2 users, I'm going to delete 1, and maybe modify, let's say 3, such as changes of password or change of address and things like that, of that nature. All right, click on next. Do you plan to use Exchange? I'm going to simply say no over here. Go on to next. Do you plan to use Windows 2000 DNS service with Active Directory Integrated Zone? Those of you familiar with AD Integrated Zone know that Active Directory Zone becomes a part of the, I'm sorry, let's do that again. The DNS zone, which can be primary or secondary, and if it is a domain controller and the DNS server is also a domain controller, it can also be what is known as an AD integrated zone. In this particular case, what happens is that the zone information, which is basically the information of the host names and the IP addresses, becomes a part of the Active Directory as far as replication goes. So in other words, whenever Active Directory replicates, the DNS zone also replicates with other AD integrated domain control DNS servers. So I'm going to say yes over here. And what is the total number of dial-in connections per day from computers joined to this domain? Let's say 5. The lease duration 8, I'm going to leave it the way it is. The reason this is important is because the information in the DNS will change depending on how often the IP addresses change, and if we leave it at 8 days, that's going to be fine. Refresh value, let's leave it the way it is. Services using DNS. These are what are known as AD integrated or AD enabled applications. We're going to not use any of those, so click on next, and then conclusion. It says that it has all the information that it needs. It went through each of these sections. We were on the last section, and it is now ready to give us a report. Okay, here we go. Let's see if we can decipher this report now. I'm going to reposition this a little bit. So it gives me some summary information over here that I have a total of 230 objects. Of those, 100 were users, so many computers, so many servers. I'll just need one server. The size of my domain databases, the number of users that I have. Domain controllers, it says 0. Basically what it means is that you do not need any additional domain controllers. One Bridget server will do, simply because I had one site. Okay, now if you were to actually click on this one, it gives you the information about the Bridget server also, as far as how much RAM it should have and so forth. Look at this, under site configuration. It tells you what the speed of the hard disk should be, the seek time and so forth. Okay, so here's the information of the domain. Here's the information of the Bridget server. The site links also should be IP, and at what speed can they run. Now, obviously the values that we had taken were not dramatically higher. So what we're going to do is we're going to say is modify domain information, and this time let's increase the value over here from 100 to, that's 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 users. All of them will be using it at the same time. Attributes, let's keep the same. How many groups will the user belong to? Let's say the group goes up tremendously, 10 times. How frequently? This is going to be a very secure network. We want to change their passwords every 30 days. And let's estimate this one more time. And here's a new estimation. Okay, going to close the screen. Click on next, and then how many 2,000 computers would you have? Let's say that I'm going to have 10, let's make it 50,000 clients. Okay, 50,000 clients. How many other? Let's say 100 other servers and so forth. How many objects will be in the Active Directory? 1,000 will be published. Next, utilization, will keep it the same. Here we go. Here's going to be a major difference. Because of the domain of that size, weekly I'll be adding, let's say 50. Deleting, let's say 30. Modifying, let's say 100. Okay. Next. And then we'll leave everything the way it is. I'm going to click on a finish button just to give you an idea. So I'm going to refresh the screen. Here we go. The number of servers go up. Look at the size of the domain database. It goes up exponentially the more users and groups and computers that you add. Now it says that, well, you know what, you need 3 additional domain controllers, 1 Bridget server, because we did not give it any information about the number of sites and so forth. But then again, if you go to the Bridget server, it will tell you what kind of processor to use and so forth. The global catalog again should be of this type in order for the domain to work efficiently. So if you're planning a domain out and you already know how many locations you will have, how many users you'll have, how many computers, it gives you a very good idea as to how many domain controllers you need. Of course, eventually all this comes down to the question of licensing and how much the company is actually willing to fork out money for licenses for to buy Microsoft servers. But this is a great what if scenario to determine exactly how many domain controllers you need if you were to plan the Active Directory from scratch. So this should conclude our video as well. Let's go back to the topics and make sure that we've covered them all. Going back to my notes over here. Let's go to the very first page. In this particular video, we were monitoring the Active Directory. To begin with, we installed the Active Directory support tools, and then we use the first tool, which is a graphical tool known as the Replication Monitor. One of the biggest advantages of this tool is to generate nice reports. Then what we did was use the command line tools. One of the most useful tools in the command line was the rep admin, and I actually showed you how to create a batch file to automate domain-wide replication of domain controllers. Finally, we use the Active Directory Sizer to plan our domain. I thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you very soon in a different video in Active Directory.